Hi there, my name's Whitney Smith. I'm the founder and CEO here at the Smith Investigation Agency, and we love to put content online that really keeps you informed. And we have an Ask the Experts playlist and other playlists here at the Smith Investigation Agency where we want you to have as much content and information as possible. And one of the biggest areas that we see people have a need is in the landlord-tenant section. So we really are here to just give you as much information as possible. So without further ado, I have a guest here with me, also named Whitney.
Hi, Whitney. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Hi, guys. My name is Whitney Ayoshola. I'm a recent paralegal graduate, and I'm here today with Whitney as well to discuss about landlord and tenant matters. I also work with NR Legal Services. I'm also an author of a book that's on Amazon, which is 5 Steps to Reduce Arguments. It's a parenting communication guide. It's also more about conflict resolution, which are also essential in the family as much as it's also essential in the law.
Yeah, there you go. That's awesome. So now we're going to talk about how the Landlord-Tenant Board works here in Ontario. So Whitney, can you give us kind of a brief explanation of what it is and how the process goes?
Thank you so much for that question. So the Landlord and Tenant Board, it's a very important board in Ontario, and that's because we all know there's a housing crisis here in Canada. So many people, so many immigrants, and so there are lots of applications in the Landlord and Tenant Board. Statistics has shown that for 2022 and 2023, we had about 73,000 applications with the LTB.
Oh, wow.
That tells you how much applications goes in a year
Yeah.
with the LTB.
And we see like on our end on the investigation side. So part of this collaboration is really talking the paralegal to the investigative world and how you guys might assist on the legal side and how we might assist on the investigative side. So we find a lot of times when we work with both the landlord and a tenant in situations. So it could be, someone looking into a bad faith eviction where, ultimately the person's saying, oh, I'm going to have a caretaker move in with me or my kids are going to move in. Well, they really just want to rent the apartment. Like you said, there's, the housing crisis, there's all sorts of, financial stuff going on, right? So people are trying to kick individuals out so that they can charge, $1,000, $2,000 more per month in rent.
That's true.
So have you guys seen a lot of that? Like, what are you guys seeing the most of with all those applications that are out there? What are you seeing kind of as the bigger issues?
In my experience with the law firm I work with in our legal services, there are lots of eviction issues, like the L1 application. The L1 application has to be the most application that we get.
Okay.
That is notice for non-payment of rent.
Okay.
And so we see lots of landlords that stuck because they have mortgage going on.
Sure.
They need money to pay for their homes.
Yeah.
And then the tenants, some of them faces, they don't have jobs anymore. They can't keep up with the rent. So these are some of the issues that we see with the landlord and tenant issues. And that is where the private investigators come in. I think the alliance between private investigators and paralegals is the most beautiful. I will call it the most beautiful marriage because
Yeah, there you go.
because we need private investigators to actually do the chasing of facts for us.
Absolutely.
And while we just focus on the advocacy part of it.
Well, it's a big thing too, because we have a lot of people that will call us on the landlord side, right? And they'll say, hey, somebody, cleaned out in the middle of the night and we went to knock on the door to get payment and they're gone and they damaged the apartment or house and they maybe stole some appliances, different things like that. So they want to help locate that individual. And it can be harder to locate them after the fact because they know that they're going to be chased potentially for non-payment, right? So they're not going to want to update their information. So we ultimately try and really encourage landlords, if they believe that someone might move out, then we'll schedule surveillance ahead of time so we can follow those individuals to their new place. And that way they have that information and it's not them and us having to play catch up for months after if the individuals just don't update anything.
Exactly. I would also say it's very important that we shed more light on the importance of private investigators because most landlords do not even know what to do. Right. So say, for instance, you're trying to get in a new tenant to get into your apartment. If you hire a private investigator, they can help you do verification, background checks to make sure that, this tenant's actually a good fit for you. Yeah. So it's very important for landlords to invest in getting good private investigators to at least mitigate some of these losses and expectations as well.
I love the background check, element to it because, you could just call and tell your sister, your brother, or your best friend, hey, give me a good reference, right? So it's ultimately digging deep and not just at surface. Like, what's the address? What do you own? And then we can say, okay, if Whitney owns this address, when did you purchase it, Whitney? And if it's a real person who owns the property, well, that name is going to be on title. We're going to know the information and that person's going to be able to verify it. But otherwise, you're just talking to their friend and you're not getting the real depth of of where that person's at. I think credit checks are important on that too, right? Because ultimately, someone might have a poor history of being able to, take care of their bills. So that would help a landlord to not, pursue somebody who might be problematic in that way.
Exactly. And so I'm talking about running credit checks. So there are some instances whereby lots of people, put up fake reports about their credit
Oh, for
checks.
sure, yeah.
And so that's where also, I think that's where private investigators also come in to help verify some of these claims. They put on false information on their applications. They lie about certain important things like their credit history, their former landlords, where they've lived before, so having like doing a proper diligence and having like a proper investigation about some of where they lived before, and also help to mitigate some of these expectations with getting a good tenant, also getting a good landlord as well.
So how does it work? So these landlords are filling in this particular form. Well, you said it was the N1.
The most filled up, that's the notice for eviction. That's
notice
the
for eviction.
N4. The N4.
So how does that work?
Which is
So
the L1.
They fill in this form and they reach out to you guys. Like, so if a landlord's watching this and they're in that predicament and they're not sure what to fill out, so they contact you guys at NR Legal and ultimately say, hey, I need to fill in this form. What is the steps from there for that individual?
So the first form landlords normally use is the N4. The N4, it's an application form that gives an eviction to leave the apartment for non-payment of rent.
Yep.
And so after you give the notice for non-payment of rent, then it takes about 14 days or 7 days. And then they can finally file an L1 application to the LTB.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's good. So at least they have an understanding of what they're going to need to fill out. And I know we've heard a lot, and we follow some of the different landlord-tenant groups on social media just so we stay informed, right? Because it helps us as investigators to see the trends and what's going on. So it helps us be better investigators when it comes to knowing how to obtain information for either a landlord or a tenant. But we find a lot of times people fill in these forms incorrectly. So the importance of using a paralegal to make sure that these forms are done, because we've seen stories where somebody fills in a form and they have to serve 4 or 5 forms before they get it right because the date was incorrect or the address or spelling or something was done wrong. So really that importance of hiring a professional to do it the first time, it costs money, but time is money just the same. So if you did the form wrong so many times, well, that's going to cost you months, because I think the landlord-tenant boards are somewhere around like 4 or 5 months right now to get any kind of a hearing. So
50 days actually.
50?
50 days.
Yeah. It's like that's a long time for, different situations. So that's in talking about how the landlord-tenant board works. So like, what does it do? Let's just give kind of a final rundown for our viewers.
Okay, so the Landlord and Tenant Board is your go-to board if you have issues as a tenant, if you also have issues with your tenant, if you also have issues as a landlord with your tenants. So this is the board you go to for your issues, in Ontario. And also the hearings are done virtually. I need to put emphasis on that.
Like, for sure. That's
the hearings are done virtually. That means you can be in the comfort of your home and also tune in to the hearings. And so each party should expect 50 days. It's like I said earlier, there's a huge backlog with cases in Ontario. Like I mentioned, there are about 73,000 cases every year, over 73,000 cases every year.
And that's only going to get more and more, I would say, over
Exactly.
time. Yeah.
So it's going to take a long while for you to actually get a hearing. It could take 50 days to schedule a hearing.
Yeah.
And it's done virtually.
Yeah. I think it's great that they do it virtually now for people, just for the costs of, the time and money, right? Of ultimately having to maybe miss a day of work, and you don't know. It's like an Ontario court, right? A provincial court system. Are you the first or are you the 20th that day that's getting seen or heard? So I think it's convenient for people to be able to do that online. So how are the hearings scheduled? So let's say somebody reaches out to your law firm or your legal firm, and they basically, say, hey, fill in this form for me. So they wait, give or take that 50 days. How does the process work from there? Does the individual themselves, either the landlord or tenant, get the notification, or do you guys and you go to the tribunal for them?
So interestingly, everything is done online right now.
Yeah.
So usually when a landlord comes to us or a tenant comes to us, we put in the application for them on their behalf, and they get a notification on the board. So if you turn into the board, the LTB board, you have both the landlord and the tenant also get notifications on the website.
Yeah.
So it makes it so easier for each party to get correspondence on what's going on the website.
And what should people expect when it comes to actually the day of and they're attending? So let's say let's give 2 scenarios. One where they're attending by themselves, so they don't have any paralegal or legal assistance, and then another if they do. What would that look like?
So if you're attending by yourself, the good part is you've given your days of the day of the hearing, so you're sure of which day the hearing is coming up, the time it's coming up, and so you tune in. And on the LTB website, we also have what to expect, how to tune in your behavior, your ethics, how to coordinate yourself while you're on camera.
Yeah.
So.
Not being inappropriate.
Not being inappropriate.
Not fresh out of the shower.
Yes, So I've seen many cases whereby the adjudicator have to like call them to order, like,
I bet.
they're not acting right on camera. So it's very important for people to behave well, act right. If not so, you'll be called out for it.
Right.
Yeah. So.
So another reason you want to have a legal representative helping you so that you're coached beforehand of what to do and how to act.
I wouldn't say coach, but probably,
Assisted.
informed.
Yeah, there you go. Informed. That's a better way of saying it. Yeah. No, that's good. Okay, so that's awesome. So that's how the Landlord-Tenant Board works and kind of the skinny details of that. So now we're going to talk about some of the common forms that we see within the Landlord-Tenant Board. So, starting with the first one, that N4, which is the notice to end tenancy early for non-payment of rent. I think you're saying that this is a pretty common form that you guys see?
Yeah, this is the most common forms actually, because it's interesting because that's where the whole problem starts.
Sure.
Tenant isn't paying rent and wants his money, and then they have an N4.
Yeah. And so what form, you had mentioned, in another video, so basically if they file an N4, then they have to follow up with an L1.
Yes.
So I think people get overwhelmed with the amount of forms that there can be and making sure that they fill them in correctly. And that's why we really want to, put the preface on hiring a legal individual, a company to help to make sure that, as a landlord or tenant, whatever the situation might be, that they're doing these forms correctly so that it's a fill it out once and be done with it rather than having to go back and forth with multiple forms.
Right. And it comes down to your objective, what you want to do. So say the issue is non-payment of rent.
Right.
So you need to know the accurate form, which is the N4.
Right.
So the purpose of the N4 is to warn the payment and the tenant for eviction for non-payment of rent.
Right.
So it's important for people to know which forms exactly suit their needs.
So then what happens? So if they fill in the N form, what does it sort of tell the individual on the other end? So let's say somebody's just really down on their luck. Maybe they, lost, a husband and wife, maybe they both lost jobs. What does that do for them? So if they get that, is that just saying, hey, you need to pay rent, or does an eviction follow that immediately after?
No. So this is how it works. The N4 lists the amount that is owed.
Okay.
It also lists the deadline to pay for the arrears of the rent, and if not paid, then it can be followed by the L1 application. There's a time range for it. It could be 7 days or 14 days, as the case may be. So it's important for you to consult a professional to get the exact timeline and duration for this application.
Yep.
And so it has to do with the N4 has the rent, the amount of rent, the calculated amount of rent that is being owed.
Okay.
And so like I said earlier, it's important for you to know your objective. So if the issue is non-payment of rent, then you know that the form to use is an N4 in filling out your application.
Well, and I think it's important too for, let's say, and we're obviously going to talk all the different forms of the LTB. So if you're on a landlord or tenant side, we're ultimately going to talk them all. But, if this is the landlord, then ultimately they should be pretty proactive with filling that out, right? Because the longer they wait, maybe the more challenges are going to come, right? So if they're dealing with, a few weeks late and then it runs to a month late, when is a good time for them to reach out and say, okay, I need to fill in this form so I have, a track record and a legal track record going on?
So I would suggest it's important for them to fill in the form as soon as the payment gets late.
Yep.
So after a reasonable amount of time has been given, and everything should be documented. So if they had reached out to the tenants via text message or anything, everything should be purely documented.
Yep.
And they can follow suit with the N4 service on them.
Okay. And that's another actually good point. What's the better method of communication? Text message, phone call, email, written letters?
Always text me. Okay, it could be reading letters,
Yep.
it could be text messages, but anything reading.
Anything right now.
Anything reading is
'cause
important.
anything else is hearsay. If
Yes,
you say, I
yeah.
talked to them on the phone and, this is what was said. Okay. All right. So then we have the N5, which is the notice to end tenancy for interfering with others, damage, or overcrowding. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
And so the N5 is an important form to use when there is overcrowding, when there is disturbance. And so generally they use the N5 to serve a notice on tenants that are causing disturbance, that are damaging the property, or allowing too many occupants in the environment, in the apartment that was rented to them. And
So we see this on surveillance all the time, and it's pretty interesting. We might have like an insurance case or something, and we don't have a picture of the individual, so we'll go to a house, and there might be 15, 20 people living in that house, and you're trying to narrow down who it is. And we have the younger generation; a lot of them will live together because it just saves on cost. So is that part of a landlord maybe rents it to 2 or 3 people, and then they all of a sudden bring in all their friends? Is that the kind of situation where that might happen?
This reminds me of a very recent scenario. So there was this landlord issue we had,
Yep.
and then the landlord rented his apartment to just one guy. The landlord lives very far away in Brampton, and he has his house in Ajax.
Yeah.
And then the guy had more people in the house.
Right.
And then the landlord wanted to come to his apartment. He gave him 24-hour notice, because
Yeah.
usually you give your tenants 24-hour notice to
Sure.
come to view the apartment. Well, here the tenant was refusing to allow the landlord to come in.
Well, of
And
course,
so-
there's a lot of people.
But there are a
living
lot of people in the house. So then he decided to show up unannounced, and then he figured there were so many people in the house, right? So these are one of the issues we see
Yeah.
as well.
So what does the LTB do in that situation? Like, do they force an eviction if you ultimately say, "Hey, I rented it to person A and person B, and now and that's of course where an investigator might come in, where we might conduct surveillance and prove that multiple individuals are living there versus just spending the night because hey, they had a party and had some people over."
So usually when such situation arises, the next thing to do is to serve an N5, and then the tenant has 7 days to correct that issue.
Okay.
And so say the tenant refuses to do anything about it, then the landlord has the right to go to the LTB
Okay.
and put in an application for L2.
Okay, that's cool. That's great to know that. Okay, next we have an N6, which is the notice to end tenancy for illegal acts or misrepresentation.
The N6 is the notice for to end tenancy based on illegal acts or misrepresentation, and also for family size, which wasn't initially declared at the onset of renting their
Right.
apartment. And usually, when this is discovered, it could lead to termination immediately.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and that's where I think that surveillance key really plays a part, because ultimately if a landlord has a situation that they, especially when it comes to, let's say, drug use, and they maybe are having a neighbor and say, these people are terrible that you've let move in, you need to do something about it. They can call us and we can do surveillance and ultimately learn more information. And maybe we find out it is a drug house, and we're able to take that evidence and then supply that to that landlord, who can then, fill in that form, that N6 form, and ultimately have the evidence package that goes with it, so that they're able to, make sure that they have the right people living in their
exactly,
home.
that's where you private investigators come in as well, because for an N6 to be, you have to have enough evidence. You have to have police reports. You have to do your findings. You have to have everything well documented.
Yep.
And so to prove your point, like, oh, there is an illegal act going on here, or there was misrepresentation at the onset.
And we really try and educate our clients too of using an investigator first versus trying to do it themselves, right? Because if they document evidence incorrectly or illegally, or maybe they don't store that evidence properly, then it doesn't have that chain of custody, and it might not match up in the setting that they need it to. So it should be obtained legally through proper legal investigations, not looking as a tactic of harassment or intimidation or anything like that. So, we find that that's, a very important stage, because you want to be able to present an evidence package and, your hands are clean. You didn't do anything wrong to obtain it. You weren't sneaking over a fence,
Exactly. And it wouldn't be disputed.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, at the end of the day, again, time is money in all these situations. So, if you have individuals that are living in a property that you need to get out for whatever reason, you want to do everything above the board so that, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
But that, so you're able to get what you need. All right, so next one, we've got the N7. So it's the notice for causing serious problems in the building. So this would obviously be more for somebody living in an apartment building. What would that look like? Like, I know we get a lot of issues where people will call and they'll say, so there's maybe no smoking allowed on the balconies. And people say, my neighbors smoke and I'm trying to keep my windows open and now I'm getting smoke smell in my house. Would that be sort of a situation like that?
Sure. So these are things that happen. These are day-to-day things that happen.
Yeah.
And so usually when things like this happen, before you get to the stage of you serving a notice, there probably would have been lots of correspondence going back and forth. Oh, you did this. I don't like this. This is offensive to me. I don't want this. And lots of this back and forth keep on going until it gets to the point where, oh, I can't take this any longer,
Right, yeah.
and that's where the landlord can put in an application for N7, which is a notice for causing serious problems in the building. And it's for serious issues like threats, like violence, like interference of the building as well.
Yeah.
And it can result as termination as little as 10 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense ultimately, right? If you're living in an apartment building, you've got potentially hundreds of families living there, especially if there's dangerous or inappropriate behavior
Right.
taking place. Then ultimately, for the safety of all the residents in that building, that's good that they have potentially such a fast process because, yeah, I mean, who would want to live in that setting, especially if you have children or pets and, that individual could be a danger to them. Okay, so next we have the N8, which is the notice to end tenancy at the end of the term.
So the N8 is the notice, like you said, to end tenants at the end of the term. Simple as it sounds. So if the time, usually we have the 1 year duration.
Yep.
And so at the end of the 1 year, then they put in, or before, they can put in like an application for the N8.
Yep.
That, I'm not going to keep this apartment after this 1 year and I have to leave. And that's where the N8 comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the landlord's using that. Now, what does a tenant do? What if a tenant doesn't want to leave and they're served this? What's their kind of recourse here?
So in a situation where the tenant doesn't want to leave, then they have to have so usually when after the 1 year duration, the agreement turns to a month-to-month lease.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
So looking at an Ontario lease literally could say January 1 to January 1.
Right.
And then right below it in bullet points, it says this just goes to month, which seems crazy because then what's the point of, having a duration set?
Yeah. So it's interesting because that's what the law is.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah. So after the 1 year duration, then naturally the tenancy, the lease transits into a month-to-month lease whereby you can literally end the tenancy after 1 month.
Yep.
Or after each month as it comes. So it depends on the tenant and the landlord as well. And in such situations, it's important for the if the tenant wants to leave, it's important for the tenant to give in notice that I'm not going to be retaining this apartment after my lease. Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone basically receives, let's say their landlord serves them an N8, do they have to do anything, or what's their response? What if they just don't want to move? So period, plain and simple. Do they have to acknowledge that they've received it? Do they have to then say, no, I'm not leaving? What does that process look like then?
They have to acknowledge that they have received the N8, right? So at least it then tells the landlord that, at the end of the lease, they don't have intentions to retain the apartment.
Yeah.
So it's important for them to actually, put in, acknowledge the N8 that was served to them by the landlord.
Okay. Because we see on a lot of the different social media groups, whether it's a landlord or a tenant group, and ultimately, like I said, we follow them for different reasons, right? It helps us to understand things that are changing, helps us to maybe pick up evidence if we need to somewhere, if somebody posts something. But, we see a lot of people saying, what do I do? I received this form. What do I do? And some people say, just ignore it, act like it, it never came. And then others are saying, oh, you have to. So I think there's a big miscommunication from people of do I have to acknowledge this or can I just leave it? And I think that's a big one. So knowing that they should ultimately acknowledge that form.
They should, yeah.
Yeah.
So anything that's been served, it's important for you to always acknowledge it. So if you're being served something formally documented and it's written, it's important for you to acknowledge it and also follow suit. And then again, if you're confused about what to do, it's important for you to ask a legal professional, a paralegal or a lawyer to put you through.
And I think too, for some people, they might not financially be able to afford a paralegal, but that there's free legal help out there, whether they're, looking on some of these social media groups, that there's some individuals who are pretty skilled and knowledgeable. And I think paralegals sometimes jump on those and answer questions for people.
That's true.
And we'll give maybe some free insight, but ultimately also say, hey, you can hire us, or, there's maybe legal aid or something like that.
I was going to say
people.
that. So there's legal aid, there's also legal clinics so that people can also use those options as well to get legal advice.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest. I would say one of the ones that you almost see is the saddest one when you see on some of these groups that people are posting. It's like a single woman situation, right? Where maybe she's got a few kids and she's getting something like that and she just feels scared. She doesn't know what to do and she doesn't understand her rights. So I think those are big ones. People, that's emotional, right? Maybe they've lived in that house for a bunch of years, or maybe a partner died or whatever happened. So ultimately, that's a lot of emotion and fear that kind of comes into that moment. So really knowing your rights and then speaking to somebody to ultimately, know what your rights are and what to do. What are your next steps?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So then we have the N9, which is the tenant's notice to end tenancy.
So
kind of self-explanatory.
Yeah. So we just spoke about the N8, that is the notice to end tenancy at the end of the term. And now we have the N9, which is the tenant's notice to end your tenancy. And it's used by the tenant to voluntarily end the tenancy. And the tenants who are a monthly lease, they give a 60 days notice before the end of the rental period.
Yeah.
And it's always good to have everything in writing.
Yeah.
And to have everything
Yeah.
dated as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, maybe the miscommunication or misconception would be, oh, I don't need to do that, right? I trust my landlord. We have a good relationship, or vice versa, right? A landlord might think the same thing. But yeah, just being like well documented, that's like in our world, we're big on that, right? Have the documentation, have the evidence. So you just always have something to support you where some people don't. So yeah, I think that's good for people. And obviously that's a pretty easy one. So N11, agreement to end tenancy.
The N11 is an agreement to end tenancy. It is used both by the landlord and the tenants. We see this more often in a situation whereby both the landlord and the tenant mutually agree to end the tenancy, the lease agreement. So the N11 is used in such situations whereby the landlord and tenancy, they come together like, okay, we want to end this agreement and this lease, and then yeah.
And we've seen a lot, I'm going to lean a lot on those social media groups because obviously we watch them. And we've seen a lot of situations where people, especially maybe newcomers to Canada, who aren't as familiar with these forms and our processes, their landlord might come to them and say, oh, here's this. And they sign it because they don't fully understand what it is. And now they've signed something agreeing essentially to leave, but they didn't really understand what they were signing. So does someone have to sign this, or can they just refuse to sign it?
It has to be voluntarily. Emphasis on the word voluntary. It has to be something you're willing to do.
Yeah.
And so you have to, both the tenant and the landlord have to sign this document for it to be valid. Yeah. So the tenant and the landlord have to sign this document for it to be valid.
But they can refuse it, right? Like they can say, oh, I don't want to sign that. I'm not comfortable signing it. I don't understand what that is. I think that's people, they don't understand the rights, and they can refuse. Oh, I don't want to sign that paperwork, and, send me something else.
Yeah, they shouldn't be pressured to do what they don't want to do. So if if a tenant is not... if that's not what you want to do, don't feel pressure to sign it. Right. So it's very important for them to go through the document, at least read everything. Yeah. Even if you don't understand it, at least have some closure on what the document says. So when you read and you understand what it says, if you have an idea, then you can think, oh, should I sign it? Should I not sign it? Yeah. And if you have some doubt, then you can ask a legal professional.
That's the nice thing. That's where, and that's what we get people calling us, asking us that, and we'll just pass them on to, a different law firm or paralegal or, whatever, to ultimately say, maybe contact these people to get some information. But that's why we find it good. And that's why we wanted to do this collaboration, because we often get so many questions about this that, we want to be able to give a little bit of advice, or at this point say, go over to YouTube and, watch these videos so they get a little bit of, that information. But definitely I think the important one on that is, people have a right to refuse signing something that they don't understand, and waiting for some information so that they really understand their rights. So the next we have the N12, notice to end tenancies for landlords or purchase owners' use.
Interesting that the N12 is one of the most common forms because for some good reasons, for some bad reasons. Yeah. So sometimes some landlords use it in bad faith, just to get the tenants out of the building, and that's where private investigators come in to, verify some of these claims if the landlord served the N12 in bad faith, or if it was actually from a genuine point, So the N12 is a notice to end tenancy based on the fact the landlord wants to move into his or her own building, and so. Sometimes some landlord kind of abuses this form, and serve it wrongly. And so private investigators come in and also do their own verification, do their own due diligence to make sure that, okay, this is real.
Yeah, I would say our two biggest things that we get called on for landlord-tenant situation could be this, right? They're getting this form and they're like, something smells funny, I don't like it. And the other side would be skip tracing to ultimately find people. But this is a big one because if they've been kicked out of their place and displaced, and maybe now they're paying, double the rent or a lot more money in rent, or had to move to a different city or town because there's nothing available, that's a big disruption to life. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there's compensation that they can get if they are able to, with surveillance, prove that landlord did that in bad faith. Like we see people that, they'll fill out the form and they'll say, oh, I need to move in with a caretaker. Well, what's wrong with you? Like there has to be something that substantiates that. You can't just say I'm living with a caretaker for what? Like, that they ultimately have to be able to prove, that, or if they're saying a family member is moving in, then ultimately, again, they're going to have to be able to prove and verify that individual is in fact living in that property. But if they've just turned around and rented it to somebody else, or they're selling it, that compensation is potentially going to be given to the previous tenants.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
And then the tenant can use the T5 application. So if they notice that, the landlord has acted in bad faith, then they can file in the T5 application as well
Yeah.
to get that due.
And would you say that's worth it for someone? Like if they believe it's bad faith and ultimately call you and they've got some evidence at hand, do you guys say, oh, you should absolutely go through with this? And then, if they are, what kind of compensation are people getting? Is it like a couple $100, couple $1,000? Like we've seen different scenarios where people, it seems like they get a lot of money and then other ones, they get a little bit of money. So
Exactly. Just like you, it's not a one size should fit all.
Yeah.
So it depends on the situation and everything. So the LTB, the court will actually look at the whole situation on Ghana, see how it has impacted on you negatively, and the facts of each case might be different from one case to another. So in some cases, the tenant can get compensation that is higher. In other cases, the tenant can get compensation that is lower. So it depends on
how negatively impacted they
exactly
were.
of each case. So that's how it works.
Yeah, I definitely would say that. So as much as that's a popular form for you guys, that's one for us too. So next we have the N13, which is the notice to end tenancy for renovations, repairs, or demolition.
So the N13 is actually used commonly by the landlords to renovate, like you said, to renovate their apartments, to demolish or to do something with your property. And usually they give a 120 days notice minimum for such notice.
I like that Toronto just came up with the whole renoviction and the whole new process when it comes to, doing renovations. Like, okay, fine. You want to, make a bigger kitchen or you want to, update the place and make it better. That's fine. But that doesn't mean you have the right to remove somebody and not allow them to come back in or try and charge them, some obscene, rent increase just because you maybe put in a kitchen or updated something.
Yeah, that's true.
Are you guys seeing a lot of that now that that's new? Because that just came in this summer, like in Toronto, for instance. Are you guys starting to see issues surrounding that, or are people falling in and complying pretty well with it?
So because my law firm is literally in Durham, so I don't think we have seen more
the same thing.
of this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, I'm sure there's definitely issues surrounding it. Maybe in the GTA specifically in Toronto. Okay, so then we have the L1, which is the application to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent and collection rent. And to collect, rent the tenant owes. So this one you guys see a lot too?
Yeah, this is the most popular one.
We'll just like put a star rating on like this one's the most popular.
Okay, so the L1 is the application to evict tenants, and that is after the N4 has been served.
Yep.
So after the N4 has been served and still nothing has been done about payment of rent, and then the landlord decides to put in the L1 application. And it can be filed after the termination date of the N4 has passed and the rent isn't paid. Which this includes a request for eviction and also for an order of payment.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's good. Nice and simple on that one. So then an L2 application to end tenancy and evict a tenant. So I think the L applications are they the follow-ups essentially to the...
Exactly. So I was like, the trick is when you hear the word N, N stands for notice.
Okay.
And so when you say N, it means notice to, notice to do something, to do something. Yeah. That's just like the little trick
there.
You
go.
And then the L applications are, the actual application to serve that follows suit with the notice that has been served.
I didn't know that. So that's good to know. See, I'm learning something from this myself. Okay, we did L2 or? Yeah. So L2 application to end tenancy and evict a tenant.
Yeah, so it's used commonly by landlords, and the L2 is tabbed with all the notices. It's tabbed with the N5, with the N6, with the N7, with N12, N13. So the L2 is tabbed with all of these notices,
And so this is if it was me, for instance, I would want to have a paralegal doing this for me because this is where it can get confusing, right?
Yeah.
It's the N5, 2, 4, 3, you're like, it can just feel overwhelming for people. So I think having that professional help is really definitely going to be necessary.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. So then we have the L9, which is the application to collect rent the tenant owes.
So the L9, like you said, is the application to collect rent that the tenant owes, and it's also used by the landlords to recover rent from a current tenant without asking for eviction. So it is useful when the landlord wants to maintain tenancy with the tenants and also collect arrears that has been owed.
So how does that work? So let's say, the person pays $2,000 a month and they were late for a month, but the landlord's, okay, I'm going to keep you here. Do they just say, make a payment plan and add, an extra couple $100 a month for the next year until you pay it back? Or is it, do they sort of make an agreement that works for them?
Yes, so because some of the hearings that I've observed, I noticed that the adjudicator sometimes they give the tenants an opportunity for them to have like a payment plan.
Okay.
And so if it is convenient for the landlord, the landlord could say, okay, I could take this.
Yeah.
And if it's not, landlord could also reject,
Sure.
the offer.
That's good. At least it gives them an opportunity. And I think the adjudicators are good in that way in trying to at least make it, suitable for everybody and what's fair.
That's true.
That's good. Cool. All right. So then the L10 application to collect money owed by a former tenant. This is where we see a lot of, the issues because this is where that landlord's trying to find the individual and ultimately collect that money.
And that's where private investigators come in like,
Yeah.
go catch that guy. Where do they stay now?
Yeah.
So the L9 and the L10, it's an application to collect money from tenant, like you mentioned, to recover rent arrears, to pay for unpaid utilities. And if the tenant has, because sometimes tenants could be very funny. They could leave your apartment without even the landlord knowing about it.
Right.
And that's why private investigators also come in to, probably trace them to their new location, to know where they are, and, help the landlord to recover and their money. So L10 is the application you use to, collect money for from a former tenant that has been
And
owed.
I think we see too with the side where there can be those damages, because ultimately it can become a he said, she said. If you are a tenant and you leave that property and you did not take pictures of the condition you left it in, the landlord could go in there and punch a bunch of holes in the wall if they're just mad at you and they don't like you or whatever the situation is and say, oh, you damaged the property. And then it's, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. So it becomes this. So, we even sell a service where we'll just go collect evidence. We'll just take videos and pictures and we'll date and time stamp them. And then we'll see, sign a sworn affidavit saying this is the condition that the property was left in. We were with the tenant when they gave the keys over.
Right.
And so we can state and say without any question, no, that property was not damaged. And this is exactly what it looked like. So that's an important one too, for people just to protect themselves, especially if they've had a landlord that was, a little shyster, then ultimately you want to make sure. And if you can't afford a private investigator, do it yourself, but make sure that you have as much, evidence as possible just showing that. All right. So then we have the T2 application, which is the application about tenant rights. So what does the T mean?
The T? Okay, it sounds for tenants. So we've been talking about landlord rights, and now we're talking about tenant rights. So tenants also do have rights. Just as landlords have their rights, tenants also do have rights. And so the T2 application is for tenant rights, and it's usually used by tenants to complain about landlord harassment, to complain about privacy violations. Say the landlord just barges into your apartment without notice, without warning, and illegal entry, interference with enjoyment. So the T2 is application for the tenant rights in all of these areas.
That's a big one too, eh? The harassment or the illegal entry. We've had situations where, someone, because a lot of people now have Ring cameras, right? They've got all these cameras inside, maybe to watch their pets or kids or, for whatever reason. And so they'll see on camera somebody breaking, a landlord breaking into their home, especially if it's maybe a shared space, like a basement apartment or, something like that, where the individual comes into their home. So what are their rights in that situation? If you're a tenant and you're literally getting a notification on your phone that says, hey, someone's in your living room. Or,
I was going to say something because we had one issue about that whereby the landlord wanted to come into the apartment, and he lives in the basement, so he came in through the inside door, the stairs, and he came down to the apartment, and the tenant found it very offensive,
absolutely.
So we see a lot of issues whereby the landlord just comes into the apartment, so because they live in the basement, they don't follow due protocols, like okay, you go knock on the door, you give the tenant a 24-hour notice, or you want to see the apartment. So these are some of the issues, and it's so funny because everything rolls on emotion, right? The landlord feels, oh, it's my apartment, I can go see my apartment, while the tenant on the other hand is like, oh, it's my privacy here. Yeah. So a lot of emotions can be at stake here, and that's why it's very important for people to be aware and to listen to insights like this and how to go about it.
For sure. Especially, I think that's a big one too, where landlords think because they own the property that they have a right to enter. But it's like, no, you've leased that property to someone. For all intents and purposes, that's theirs.
Even if it's a basement.
No matter what it is, like they're paying for that. That's that individual's home and they have a right to privacy. So I think that's a big one too, with that, the expectation to privacy. That's a law. Like you have to respect someone's privacy and, ultimately not interfere with the reasonable enjoyment of their home and their property and whatever that might look like.
That's true.
So that's an interesting one. Okay, so T5, tenant application for bad eviction.
Yeah, so that's your go-to application when a tenant discovers, oh, maybe the landlord actually served me notice, unfairly. He didn't really want to move into the apartment. He just wanted to get me out of the apartment. So the T5 is the application for bad faith eviction, and it's used by tenants as well. And so the purpose is to, talk about, to book what the landlord has
Yep.
done, who acted in bad faith
Yep.
in serving the tenants a notice to leave the property, on the basis that he wants to use the property.
Yep.
So
These are the ones that we find interesting, and obviously we deal a lot with because we're looking, we're going after the fact in that surveillance. Or maybe, someone calls us and says, hey, I just got this paperwork and I want to sort of, start the tracking process now of understanding. And, we've seen the ones where somebody gets served the form saying, oh, caretaker's moving in with me. And then they challenge that. And okay, that form gets dropped because, well, clearly that had holes in it. And then it's, oh, my kid's going to move in. Well, we confirmed that your kids aren't moving here. Okay, let's scrap that. We're going to go with another form. And they just go form after
Right.
form. And it's like, you're just starting a bad faith trajectory, right? And then, you hear from, someone's walking their dog and a neighbor says, oh, so-and-so selling that house and she's going to sell it to me, and then they're like, oh, really?
Really?
Like, yes,
Like
I thought
that,
their caretaker / their kid needed to move in.
Yeah.
So it's really, there's a lot of different situations, but really for us, it's that investigating, learning all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Talking to neighbors and going out, because neighbors unintentionally will tell you anything and everything, right?
That's true.
We'll sometimes, like a few of us as investigators, will walk a neighborhood with a dog and, people talk, right?
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, who is that? That's a beautiful house. And all of a sudden it's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, Susie and Bob are going to sell it. And you're like, oh, really? So there's a lot of ways that, us as investigators can get that information. And then of course, people can take that information to you guys to help defend them in that situation.
Right. And so in that situation, tenants can also ask for a compensation for about 12 months.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself in that situation, all is not lost. You can still also, fight it out and also get a compensation of about 12 months rent.
So it's 12 months rent.
Yes.
So yeah, well, there you go. Like that, that could be substantial for
Yeah.
somebody, especially, you maybe have people in a 1-bedroom apartment that's small, but if
Right.
this is a home and people are paying a significant amount of money, you see homes in the GTA area, they could be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month, right?
Right.
So you could be talking about some serious money if a landlord is in fact doing something in bad
Bad
faith.
faith,
So
yeah.
definitely financially, it's worth them doing their due diligence and really
Right.
understanding their rights, and then really understanding, what evidence can be potentially gathered to prove that if they genuinely believe that something's gone on and the landlord acted in bad faith. Now, for that last one, do they have a time limit? So if, at 11 months in, they find out that, the individual sold the house or did something, do they still have time because it's within that 12 months?
Okay, so there's a time limit for it. There's a 1-year duration
Okay,
for all
yeah.
of this.
Is that from the date of move out?
It's from the date of move out?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay,
from the date
so
of
that's good.
there's a 1-year duration, and so you have to your application has to be filled in between 1 year.
Yep.
So after 1 year, so you can just come back and say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I just found that my landlord acted in bad faith after 2 years."
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
not going to work.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
But within that year,
Yeah.
then they have, because that's what we tell people, right? Like
Right.
ultimately, yeah, if there's something that we can find in that time, and we might even be building evidence over time. They might not want to, sort of show their hand right at once, right?
Right.
They might want to gather it and then, right at the end, kind of produce the evidence. And, because the landlord could then say to their kid, hey, move in, real quick and make it look like you live here,
Yeah,
something like that.
that's
So,
true.
yeah, awesome. Okay, well, there we go. There's the common landlord-tenant
Tenants
board
form.
notices.
Yeah.
And let's go over the N, the T, and the L again. What are they?
So the N stands for the notice,
Yep.
and the L, the landlord. The T is for tenant. That's just little scope for you to get to know
Yeah,
all of
that's
this
a little
form, so you
fun
don't get
fact.
confused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. Oh, cool.
Right.
All right, so now we're going to talk about what makes a form invalid. So, we've talked about the N4, N5, N12, N13, L1 and 2, and the T2 and 5 as just some of the forms that are out there. What would make these forms invalid? And this would be both on the landlord and a tenant side.
Okay, so it's interesting how some little things can make a form invalid. So take for example wrong dates. So if you're having the wrong dates in your application, it's naturally translated to misinformation on your application.
Which it should be. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
so that means what you're saying is not correct. It's incorrect,
Yep.
And so that could make the form invalid.
Okay.
And also missing details, can also make a form invalid. If a form is not served properly, and we have different forms of service, it could be in person, it could be via mail, it could be through email if the tenant has actually, subscribed to that form of correspondence.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's good because not everybody would maybe want something served by email. Maybe they
Yeah.
want it served either by mail or in person. But then obviously some people, if it's a landlord who doesn't live in the same, city or province, then maybe
Right.
they need to do it for, registered mail or something like that.
Yeah, so it's important for for all of this to be properly documented.
Yep.
And so if you served something, in my law firm, I noticed that one of the best practices is to always confirm if they received the forms, like what they've
Right.
received, and half the time they acknowledge it. So
Right.
that way you can document the acknowledgement of service as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a big one for that would be, what makes it invalid? Well, it's that wrong dates, missing details, and proper service. And that's where just hiring a paralegal
Yeah.
to do it for you is just going to save you the steps instead of being a landlord who maybe you need to get people out for whatever reason. And if you keep doing the form wrong, or even as a tenant, if you're trying to come after the landlord and you're doing the form wrong, it's, time is money. So really it's just important to,
Right.
make sure you do it right the first time and, hire a professional like yourself and your firm to make sure that you cross all the T's and dot all
Dot
the
your
I's.
I's.
Yeah. Right
And
on.
talking about improper service as well. So you don't want to just go, serve somebody and you leave the document with a kid.
Right.
Like, oh, is your mama home? Oh, no, she's not home. Okay, you could just give her this. That's wrong. So
Right.
talking about proper service, you have
Sure.
to make sure they get the document rightly. Unless they could say, oh, I didn't get it. And there's nothing you could do.
Yep.
They didn't get it. So
Yep.
it's very important for you to make sure that, okay, the document you're serving is actually done properly.
Yeah. And that's where we see too on the investigation side, our process serving, right? Where one of our investigators goes out and says, hey, you've been served on something. And then they can sign an affidavit swearing, yes, that person was served. And I gave it directly to Whitney at, 10:05 in the morning or, whatever that looks like. So there's no confusion and you can't say, oh, I never got it. And like, yes, you did. And
That's
they might
true.
even record that, just for whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like if the landlord says this person's pretty sketchy, then ultimately we might even record that service to make sure that, hey, it happened on this date and on this time.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to talk about digital evidence at the LTB and how that works in ultimate, people, how paralegals and private investigators, how we can collect that information so that, it can be presented to an adjudicator.
Right. So for paralegals, like in my law firm, all we usually do is we get everything documented, whether in paper form, via emails, whatever correspondence we have it saved properly
Yep.
in digitally, and then we have it combined all together there's a format for it.
Yeah.
So we have that done, which is properly prepared, so that when because everything is done online, so when you're sharing your evidence and you're sharing your screen, everybody can see it in
Yeah.
such a way that both the adjudicator can see it, all the parties, online can also see.
Yeah. And the public, because
and the
anybody
public
can
too,
join
yeah.
that link. Yeah.
Yeah, can also see it. So
Yeah.
it has to be done in a very, coherent manner as
Yeah.
well.
Well, and you would want to look presentable, right? Especially if you're the one who's coming in with evidence and you're trying to say, oh, this happened or this happened. You're going to want to have a proper evidence
Yeah.
package. So, ultimately, if they've hired us, then, that evidence is going to withstand in whatever setting it goes
Right.
into. But then, we also have people that might come to us that they have their own evidence that they've obtained for the last, 1 or 2 years. And we can take that evidence and we'll compile it into an evidence package for them. So it's indexed properly, because we know with watching the LTB hearings, they might say, okay, reference that text message. What page is it on? And people are like,
Yes.
they're so confused, right? Where,
Yeah.
even just indexing it properly. So, oh, anything to do with that form? Well, that's on page 35 to 45.
Yeah.
And they can, go in there and find it, especially if there's a lot of evidence back and forth. It can be very
Exactly.
confusing. So, really it's putting that package together in a good way. And, like you guys said, right, you're
Yeah.
presenting it too. You want to have like the right package
And that comes out to good preparation and organization
Yeah.
as well. So sometimes the adjudicator can ask you, where is that? Where can I find that? So
Yeah.
you have to make sure that everything is properly indexed as well. So when you want to point it out, it's easier for you to,
Yeah.
point it out to the adjudicator too.
Yeah. Yeah. So note to self, hire us, hire you
Yeah.
guys, and you'll have all the package you need and all the good evidence. So yeah, that's awesome. Digital evidence at the LTB.
Right.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about the importance of proper service. So what does that look like for you guys?
So it's important for you to serve things properly. So when it's not done properly, it can lead to a huge lot of, costly mistakes.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it can render everything, not valid as well.
Yep.
So, and there are different ways to serve. Like we mentioned earlier, there are different ways to serve document. It could be via email. It could be via mail.
Yep.
It could be personal service. And so, if it is personal service, then we can have like an affidavit of, like you mentioned earlier too, that says, oh, this document has been properly served on the tenant. And so it's just important for you to do things, correctly, rightly, so that at the end of the day, you don't have your application, thrown out, like,
Right.
So
Yeah, and for us, it's really important if we're doing process serving that, we document, it was served to Whitney at this exact time on this date. So there's no confusion and there can be, no issues, which, sometimes that's important. Maybe you don't need a process server in a normal situation, but in some you might. So there's always two sides of that spectrum, right? You might have somebody that you can just hand it to the door because it's a good relationship,
right,
versus it could be a bad relationship and you have to go the route of hiring an investigative company and having a process server serve any documents just to have your hands kind of clean and clear. And, because someone might say, oh, that person's trying to harass me or intimidate me and force me to sign something, where maybe it's just an actual document that they need to have because, it's part of the process and steps. So I think that's important too. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what to do if you're a tenant and you receive an N-12. So kind of want to go through, some of the information on that N-12 because we deal a lot with this as investigators. But, we really want to understand it. I want to understand it more myself. So, it basically is when the landlord, their immediate family member or a purchaser intends to move in. So the tenant gets at least 60 days notice. The N-12 must include an affidavit of intent to occupy.
Right.
And it must include compensation. So it's not a valid document if it doesn't include compensation, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So because the asking the tenant to move, and it's only reason for them to get the 1 month compensation.
Yep.
For the tenant as well. And like you mentioned earlier, they have to have 60 days notice.
Yep.
To tell them, okay, we need our property back, at this point of time, at this time. And that gives the tenants, ample of time to, make more decisions on what they want to do. And so if the tenants also notice that the landlord acted in bad faith, they can also file for a T5.
Yep.
And that's the application you bring to the LTB that tells that, oh, the landlord is acting in bad faith. So sometimes the landlord, they might not be acting in bad faith, and they might be acting in bad faith.
Right.
And that's where private investigators come in to, do their verification.
Yep.
So you know exactly what you're doing.
Yep.
And so you're sure that, okay, my landlord acted in bad faith, that's why he kicked me out. Or maybe he didn't act in bad faith and he really needed his property.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting, there's a lot of Facebook groups that have, Ontario tenant rights and landlord rights and all those things. And, we follow a lot of these just to, really understand the ins and outs of what's going on and potentially to grab evidence from if we ever need to. But we see a lot of people that, they'll say, oh, yeah, I was served an N-12, but there was no compensation. So then it's not valid, right? So they might be freaking out and not knowing what to do, and they're scared because they don't know how they're going to pay for another place and how are they going to move. But if it doesn't come with all those things and the steps aren't done right, so that's where hiring a paralegal is really important, because then you can say, okay, does it come with the right amount of notice? Does it have this? Does it have that?
Yeah.
And ultimately they're staying within knowing their rights and then also being protected. So that I think is a big one that people just get very scared when they're served that. And, you want to make sure, obviously, if that person's in that situation, that everything is above bar and what it should be.
That's true.
Yeah. So that's where they call you and they call me, and the two Whitneys will help them out. So now we're going to talk about spotting a bad faith eviction. So, we see as private investigators all the time, people are calling us and they'll saying, someone sold the property and, we moved out, and 3 weeks later, after a recycling kind of construction bin was in the driveway, clearly there was renovations going on, and now there's a for sale sign, and potentially someone's moved out. So we might see that, or, someone says a caretaker's moving in, or maybe a child is moving in. And then, maybe the individual who previously lived at that place has met the landlord's kids and then knows that's not the landlord's kids that lives in that property. So we see a lot of times where, we go out and then we're looking to compile evidence. So if we as private investigators, someone comes to us and they say, I think there's a bad faith situation, and we find that evidence, what does the individual then do with that evidence?
It's very important for them to document that evidence. So everything, half the time it starts with, sometimes it can be from hearsay, like the instance you just mentioned. It can also be your instincts.
Yep.
Sometimes instincts just like, maybe they're acting in bad faith. And then you want to try to go back and do your verification to see if it was really true or not. Right. So it's important for you to actually document all of these things, because that's how you build, build a case. You have a proper evidence package.
Yep.
So you can't just claim, oh, my landlord acted in bad faith when you don't have proof for it. So you have to have all of this properly documented. Oh, Did he really did he really want to move in? Did he really want to sell the property?
Yeah.
You know, what exactly is the situation of things? So every single thing that buttresses the point that, oh, this landlord acted in bad faith
Yep.
has to be thoroughly documented.
So let's say they've come to us, we've documented everything. So let's say like, yep, we know it. That happened. This house was actually sold. The new owners moved in on this date. We've confirmed it. We've met with them. So let's say that tenant comes to us, we supply them with the whole package. If they reach out to you guys, then what do you do?
We get all of those evidence and compile everything together.
Yep.
So the evidence can supplement the application. So in the application, we put in details everything that has happened.
Yep.
When the tenant discovered
The discrepancy.
exactly and
Yeah.
everything. So after we put in the written narration and everything, then we put in the supplementary, which is the evidence package.
Yeah. And then that's where they might get compensation at the end of it.
Exactly.
So it's, it's an investment obviously for them to hire an investigative agency, and it's an investment for them to hire a paralegal.
Yeah.
However, there's, if that was a bad faith eviction, then they're going to get compensated. And
Right.
it's, I think you said 12 months worth of rent.
right. Yes.
It's a considerable enough amount of money,
yeah.
but like the expenses of somebody moving, right?
Yes.
Especially if somebody didn't do that in good faith. Well, somebody might have had to move and pay $1,000 or $2,000 more per month. The landscape of rentals is so different in the last few years, right? What
Right.
was a $1,500 maybe apartment is now $3,000 now. It's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's good. So ultimately, if they spot something or they think something's bad, they can call us as investigators, and then ultimately working with a paralegal is the best to do in spotting that bad faith.
Right.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about on the landlord side. What does the landlord do if their tenant is not paying rent?
So the first thing for the landlord to do is actually to put in an N4. And it's after, obviously, some background correspondence has been shared about, non-payment of rent. So they put in the N4, and the N4 gives the tenants either a 7 or a 14 days notice, like to, fulfill their obligations towards paying their rent.
Absolutely.
And if they default, then the landlord has the option to also proceed to the LTB and put in an L1 application.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, so talking about locating a tenant who has, run away from the property and refuse to pay rent. So how do we go about that?
Yeah. So individuals will contact us, right? So that landlord might say, someone just moved out, or maybe they moved out 2 or 3 months later, right? Because, if they've had someone who wasn't paying rent and like consistently not paying rent, but they're saying, I promise to pay. And maybe they were paying for a little bit. Maybe they're giving a couple $100 a month, and then all of a sudden they just stop. Well, that landlord still owed that money. So they can contact us, and we'll do what we call skip tracing, which is essentially locating the current address of that individual, or maybe individuals. Maybe it was a couple, maybe it was roommates, friends, whatever. So we'll locate all individuals who owe money, and we'll give a current address so that landlord can either take it to the LTB or a small claims, to essentially receive any money that's owed to them.
Oh, interesting. So that means all hope is not lost.
Yeah, no, it's not at all. Yeah, and I think for some people, obviously it's a cost, right? They're already out money. So at some point, I think people have this throw good money after bad kind of thought. But, we have people that come to us, they could be owed 30 grand or more. And sometimes they're only owed 10 grand, but 10 grand is still 10 grand, right? So at the end of the day, and for some, it might even be like $1,000, but it's principle for them. It's that person didn't pay and I want them to pay.
Yeah.
And they have every right. That's their property, and they're ultimately owed that money. So, we help no matter how much money they're trying to retrieve. And I would say on one side, so we get asked this a lot. If somebody hires us to skip trace somebody, and let's say it costs them $1,000 plus tax to locate that person, can they bill the tenant the money that they had to spend for us to find that information? Do you know if the LTB would ever say, yeah, if you had to spend X amount of money to hire an investigator, well, yeah, you can bill that back to the tenant. Do you know if that by chance?
That would be a question. That'll be probably somebody who is licensed can actually answer.
There you go. Okay, yeah, no worries.
Okay, so talking about providing evidence and everything. So how do private investigators, put up all the evidence package, including the photos, the videos, to make it very admissible, for paralegals?
Yeah. So it really depends on the situation. So, let's say it's looking for damage of a property, right? So we could go in and do a mix of photo and video evidence. So, we'll document the inside, interior and exterior of the property. If there is any damage, really specifically showing the damage that was caused, that maybe even can be showed to a professional for an examination of, cost of repair. So it really depends that, it's also depending on the situation. We might need to talk to neighbors, right? So if it's more people living in the property than are supposed to, right? So let's say a husband and a wife on paper say they rented it, but maybe they have university age kids and all their friends are living there. So the landlord's trying to confirm, hey, who lives in my house?
Right.
So, we'll do surveillance within the neighborhood and we'll be documenting who comes and goes, and we'll, connect with the neighbors. Hey, who lives in that house? Do you see people over there often? Oh, it's those young people. Oh, how many of them are usually here, right? So, ultimately working a mix of surveillance, getting photographic and video evidence, with permission, obviously, if we're inside of the property, or, just doing discrete surveillance outside of it. And then a mix of, connecting with neighbors and really trying to learn as much as possible about the property.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So we noticed that half of the problem we have is because verifications aren't done right.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you go as private investigators to make sure your verifications are done right when it comes to employment verification, credit checks, and all of these things?
Yeah, we always try and have a relationship with landlords ahead of time, right? So if it's a landlord who maybe owns multiple properties, maybe even it's just one, but we want to have an established relationship with them so they can call us right away and say, okay, I already know that this is the information that you're looking for, so we can do a due diligence check. So we want to run that background, see if there's any criminal or unsuitable behavior. And it's different than, like an employment verification, for instance, or an employment background check. It might just give a check mark for, nothing, or an X for, something, but it doesn't give the details. Where with an investigative agency, we're looking deeper. So we'll do social media dives. We're going to look online. We want to understand who the individual is so that the landlord has that idea,
Right.
And, so many reference checks, right? Like, am I calling your best friend, your sister, your mom, your dad, or am I calling an actual individual that you've rented from and I can get legitimate information from? So we're doing all the extra steps, right? We're making sure that we connect with the previous landlord, not just, whoever you say, because we're going to question that landlord supposedly on the other end. Oh, when did you purchase the property and how long have you owned it? And we already know that information because we're going to do our due diligence. We're going to run property searches. We're going to learn as much about that individual before we have that conversation. So we'll be able to catch them in a lie. And
Right.
if we, if you say, oh, I own 123 ABC Street, but you're actually the best friend, well, you're not going to know when that property was purchased.
Exactly.
But the real owner is able to say, yeah, my husband and I bought that property as an investment and we bought it in, 2015 and we, whatever. Right? So they're going to have that information to actually verify who's lived in this place. Did they actually pay their rent, and not just talking to a friend or family member? So, that's important. Also doing credit checks, of course, with consent, is important, because somebody could say, oh, I'll give you my credit report. Well, they're just going on Canva and they're creating a credit report document. No, people do it, right?
Yeah,
like
that's true.
Canva's an amazing system where now we have AI where you can tell, something on AI, hey, make me a credit report and make me look like I'm, King Tut with the best credit in the world. Where ultimately we want to make sure that we have the right information so that landlords are truly informed of who's moving in their property. And, if somebody has less suitable credit or maybe has had criminal history in the past, well, maybe that was in the past and maybe they've changed and, they can ultimately make an informed decision. So for us, it's presenting all the information and really eliminating any discrepancies. Okay, this didn't make sense. This didn't check off. And we can professionally say, if I'm looking at 3 different individuals, this one seemed the most appropriate. This one passed all the checks where there was maybe some gaps in the other ones. And, if you have people who are lying or being deceptive up front, well, it's possible that it's going to continue if they're doing that behavior already.
That's good. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Paralegals and investigators, I would say, is the most beautiful marriage. And so because they go hand in hand, they help each other.
Absolutely.
And so as private investigators, they do more of chasing the facts for us, verifying the accuracy of every detail presented to us, which helps us to support our arguments and help us to streamline things to see areas in which any of the parties have breached the law. So what are your thoughts on these issues?
Yeah, I think it's great when you're talking to 2 professionals from the worlds of the legal and the investigative side, right? Because when people think private investigator, I could be in an airport traveling and I meet someone and they're like, oh, what do you do? And you say private investigator and they're like, oh, so all the cheating spouses. And you're like, yeah, sure. That's a very small part of the world. We actually deal a lot with landlord-tenant situations. Right. So we're dealing with the surveillance and the skip tracing. So, it really is a beautiful marriage because ultimately we're able to gather the facts that you're then able to present and potentially find fault on either side. Right. If somebody's lied about, maybe some of the paperwork, or if they've maybe been deceptive of who actually lives in a property, or if they're deceptive of, an eviction or whatever that process looks like, our evidence can blend in with, your fight for justice for whether it's a landlord or a tenant. So I think that's really important for people to understand what their rights and their options are when it comes, right? So having the paralegal gives them the rights and the knowledge, but having us, gives them the justice and the evidence and the information
That they
that they
need.
need. Yeah, and I think that's the big thing that people, maybe there's this misconception of, how do I get this evidence? And they're trying to obtain it themselves, but hiring a professional is the easiest. Just like, same thing. You don't want to fill in forms incorrectly. You don't want to
So,
represent yourself wrong. So, hiring you guys is it's the same benefit.
interesting.
Yeah. So when we talk about social media investigations, for us, we're ultimately, being contacted maybe by a landlord or a tenant to find information online, whatever that might look like. So, in some of those situations, it could be, a tenant comes to us and says, hey, I was asked to move out. The landlord is, doing a renovation and then they're moving into the house. And so, fine. Okay. They move out and then they find on Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace or some sort of online platform that the landlord, in fact, renovated the place and is now renting it for, a considerable amount more money. In a situation like that, what would, let's say it's a tenant, and let's say they find that out and we compile all that evidence, what would their next step be with contacting a paralegal? How do they fight that to defend what they've now found?
Also, the first thing for them to do will be to have like you said, get all of this documentation, the evidence, the time they found out, the pictures of the posting on Kijiji, have all of that, compiled together, and they will put in an application of that's T5, and we'll put in the application talking about how they found out, when they found out, it was found on Kijiji, and also have all of this supplemented in the application as well.
Right.
Then we'll file it with the LTB.
Yeah, there you go.
So talking about surveillance for proof of occupancy, how do private investigators go about their daily activities with surveillance and to ensure it's legal and ethical and you're not breaching the law?
Yeah. So for us here at the Smith Investigation Agency, we're a national company. Our brand is important to us, right? So we're not going to do anything that's unethical or illegal or unprofessional because at the end of the day, we're a national company. Like we have a brand across Canada that we want to make sure that we're, working within the rules, the laws, and the guidelines that surround our industry. So, for me, that's very important. Integrity is important. Doing the right thing, right, is important. So we're only going to work on cases that are ethically done, right? So if a client calls us, they have that free consultation and they say, hey, I'm a landlord or I'm a tenant and this is the situation and I just need to find proof. Okay, we'll verify that that story's correct and understand the situation. And let's say, it's a landlord that wants to prove who's living in the home, and maybe the person sublet the home and they weren't allowed to, or there's been no permission to do so. So they want to verify who's in the home. Well, they have every legal right to do so, to verify who's in their home. Because if they have somebody who's misrepresenting themselves as, the individual who's on paper for the home and they're not, then they have every right as the landlord to hire us to then obtain evidence. And we're not going to trespass and we're not going to do things illegally when we're obtaining that video. So we want to make sure that all the evidence we obtain is obtained properly. So it's going to hold up in a hearing or in a small claims court or wherever it needs to. So for us, it's, we're always going to be above the board. We're always going to make sure for a client's sake that everything that we obtain, not only professionally, we have a brand and our name to represent well, but also for our clients so that anything that we obtain holds up for them in whatever, again, a hearing or a small claims court.
Right. I like that how you mentioned that the landlord gives you guys the authority, so you're not trespassing or anything. You're doing everything ethical, and it's right.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't even need to go on a property, right? If they're just trying to verify who's there, we can be parked within the neighborhood or, depending on the situation, right? If it's in a subdivision, we're just, we're parked maybe out front of the house and we're just documenting.
I never knew that.
Yeah, we'll just be documenting who's coming and going, right? So most of the times we're never going to step foot on that person's property. But if we're given permission and for whatever reason, let's say they want to verify something that's on the property, or maybe somebody's built, some sort of a shed or a bunkie or something that they didn't have permission or didn't have a permit for, then the landlord can say to the tenant, hey, within 24 hours, we're going to come to the property, and they can bring us as a professional witness to document the property for them as well. So there's situations like that. Maybe somebody's, damaged the inside of the home or, done some renovation they weren't supposed to do that's caused damage. Then, they can give that proper legal notice and we can go in with them to obtain any evidence that's needed.
Oh, amazing. That's good to know. Okay, so talking about affidavits, reports, and presentation tips of your evidence, and package and everything. How do we go about this in an organized way?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, right? So if people are taking evidence to, a landlord-tenant board hearing, they want to have it compiled properly because adjudicators might say, okay, let's say you referenced a text message on a specific day. They're going to say, where is that in your evidence package?
Right.
So you want to have everything presented properly. So you want to have an index page that says, okay, all the text messages are within, this range of, from page 2 to 50 is text messages, and then pictures of the house is from 50 to 100, or whatever that looks like. So everything needs to be organized properly. So very quick reference is able to happen. If you're going to throw something that's evidence-based, well, then you have to be able to verify where that is. So, for us, we compile evidence. That's what we do, right? So we will ultimately take any evidence that we've obtained, and it's obviously going to be in a proper report, or we can assist a client in their evidence. So whether it's a landlord or a tenant, they can send us all of what they have, and we can compile that, and we can build that index so that they have a clear, presentable case, which ultimately helps you guys.
Exactly.
Because you have the right
Yeah.
details, and you're able to, essentially you want to look professional,
Professional,
right? You don't want to
right.
look bad being like, oh, I have no idea
Yeah.
where that is. So, it makes both of us look good. It makes your job easier to support your client, and it makes it easier for us to ultimately have that client also feel supported. And, if they're there in that hearing, that they're able to quickly reference what they need. So, for us, we want to look professional, but we also want to make sure that it's easier for a client to have what they need, because it can be a stressful situation for people, right? When they're in a hearing and they've maybe never been in that kind of legal setting, and people are talking fast and they don't understand the words. So if they can kind of slow down and be like, I have everything and it's organized and it's right here in front of me, and so does everybody else. I look good. I look professional. I feel a little bit calmer because, I'm not freaked out, not knowing, oh my gosh, where is
That's
it?
true.
So I think it definitely
Yeah.
helps. So for us, we're all about presentation in that way because, our name is on those reports too, right? So we
Right.
want to make sure that, we represent, our company well, but also, people are informed and they have the information that they need and they look presentable, not only you, but, the client, whether it's a landlord or a tenant.
Oh, that's good. In addition to what you just mentioned, at my law firm, NR Legal Services too, talking about presentation tips with evidence, it's also carefully done.
Yeah.
So from the paralegal standpoint, right, sometimes our client, they don't even know which evidence is important.
Yeah.
Like they have all this bulk of information. They don't know which one is important. They only know, they give us everything, it's like a full meal,
Yeah,
and they give you
exactly.
everything.
Yeah.
So it's the job of a paralegal to sort out whatever useful information
Yeah.
like we need to put everything together to make sure everything is coherent and
Yeah, and it helps people too. We find on the investigation side, they could have a lot of information. Well, it's obviously time for our investigators to prepare that report, or it would be time for your staff to have to go through and compile and present everything. So if somebody can present as much of an organized sort of package as possible, we can ultimately, whether it's a paralegal or an investigative agency, doing that work, it can save them a little bit of time if they can have somewhat of a prepared thing versus being like, someone at tax time when they throw a box of receipts at their,
Right.
their accountant and, says, here, figure it out, right? So
Yeah.
ultimately it's good for, a landlord or a tenant to also, be prepared and, having everything documented in emails and in correspondence. And if something was certified and sent in certified mail, having all the receipts, all that stuff is very important for them to just keep track of everything. And you hope you never need it, but you have it if you do.
At the end of the day, that's good.
Yeah. So I want to learn more about the role of mediation. So, my understanding is, somebody gets an LTB hearing and they have a date. Let's say their date is November 1st. So they log into the portal that day. The adjudicator introduces themselves and says, oh, I have so many cases before me today. And then they'll offer someone's situation and say, would you like mediation? Can you kind of break that down for me? What does that look like?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. So in some of my observations, I noticed that they always give the options to the parties if they want mediation or not. So it's a willing thing. They have the right to choose mediation or not. And they also make it clear to them that even if you choose mediation, it doesn't impact on your case negatively. So the result of the mediation doesn't impact on your case negatively.
Yep.
It's just a way to help both parties come to a quicker resolution and helps everyone save their time, stress, and energy.
Well, it would just make sense, right? At the end of the day, if it was me and I'm in that situation, especially you might have to wait around all day,
Right.
for a hearing, and you don't know what's going to happen. But if you can amicably, say, okay, fine, let's settle on this. Maybe you're the one going after somebody, and they, there's a compensation on the table, and it's, you're asking for 20 grand. Well, they're offering you 10. Maybe you make some sort of middle
Yeah.
ground. Okay, fine.
Yes.
Let's do this, and then we squash it versus having to present, to an adjudicator who could ultimately give you nothing.
Yes.
So.
And so mediation is very important. Like, it's a powerful tool right now because at the end of the day, in most of the mediation I've actually experienced, it comes down to the interest of both parties.
Yep.
The landlord doesn't want to waste time, and without no money.
Right.
The tenant perhaps also is tired of the frustration and want to just get things sorted. So mediation is actually a way to, bridge the both gaps and, come together to a quicker resolution.
Yep.
So I will always encourage mediation, in any conflict situations as well.
Yeah, I mean, what does it hurt, right? You're ultimately just, if anything, you're getting a more informed opinion, or if you are going to choose to fight them, maybe you're learning their tactics ahead of time.
Exactly.
They're gonna share their hand in mediation, so you can, like a good poker face, right? You can be watching and learning. So a good tactic would just be, hey, do it. It doesn't hurt, right?
Yeah, it doesn't
Go
hurt.
in there, learn what you're going to learn, and then what they have or how they're going to fight it.
Yeah.
And that might help, that person fight stronger on their end.
Yes.
Yeah.